The 2022 election results do contradict every economic model that's out there, contradict every historical parallel precedent that's out there, contradict the exit polls on election night itself from the media itself, and contradict almost every historical past comparable election. And if this election was being done overseas, if this was a Russian election, the State Department would be denouncing it on a daily basis because you have results that contradict exit polls. That's one of the signs they take. Second, you have methods of counting the ballot with delay after delay after delay and key place after key place after key place that, as Tucker Carlson mentions, keeps magically resulting in one party winning. Over 80% of the time, when there's a delay of 24 hours or more, the election results go to the Democrat. That looks really bad. How is it that these really tight elections keep magically swinging in one direction the longer you can delay the counting of the votes? The entire world can count ballots in a day. Brazil had their election results in 3 hours. France had their election results in 4 hours. Brexit had their election results in a few hours. How can the entire globe count their votes within a day, usually the same day, within a few hours, as was done in Florida, as was done in Texas, but they just can't in California. They just can't in Nevada. They just can't in Arizona. They just can't in key state after key state after key state. And then it just magically, Democrats keep coming out ahead over and over and over and over. We know the people running these elections are Democrats overwhelmingly from their past, or are anti, even if they're Republican, they're anti these group of Republican candidates. And it looks horrible. Like in Nevada, you have in Washoe County, all of a sudden the cameras go down so you can't see what's happening. And when it comes out, it's another Vegas style magic act. Look at all the new Democratic ballots we found. Isn't that incredible? And then you have frauds like John Ralston, who says that anybody that questions an election is evil and terrible, when he himself promoted Russia collusion in his pal Harry Reid, one of the most corrupt politicians he helped cover for decades, because John Ralston is a corrupt political hack who's a fraud, saying anybody who questions these elections is terrible and evil. Yes, it takes day after day after day, and the ballots kept coming in. As Nate Cohn of the New York Times called it, the big key of this election was the post-election day vote. How is there a post-election day vote? It's because these ballots just keep coming in, coming in, coming in. And then you have the unions who get to cure the ballots. This means if your signature didn't match, because maybe it wasn't you who did the vote, you get a chance to vote again after election day. People can look all around the world. They will not find an example of another country in the entire globe that does elections like this. Nobody has mass mail-in voting. Nobody in the entire globe does this. Why? Well, for that, you can read the international legal standards for elections. I recommended you can read the Election Integrity Commission. You can read the United States Election Assistance Commission. You can read Jimmy Carter and James Baker's report from 0405. You can read the statements of judge after judge after judge. You can read the statements of the Democratic Party in Georgia in 2009. What did they all agree on? Mass mail-in, or you can read the New York Times, August 2012. Mass mail-in balloting equals too much opportunity for fraud. That's what the New York Times said. That's what leading election scholars said. That's what the Election Integrity Blue Ribbon Commission said. That's what the United States Election Assistance Commission said. That's what Jimmy Carter said. That's what the Democratic Party said. We would not allow these election standards to exist anywhere else in the world and recognize the election. And yet we're deciding the United States Senate based on those standards. We're deciding the United States House based on those standards. We're deciding governorships based on those standards. It is an embarrassment. America is no longer the leader of election integrity. It is the seller of election integrity.
Here, listen to this, Robert. I saw this yesterday when I was
out. Of these that are actually election day votes in person, and then the rest of the 75,000 are late earlies dropped off on election day. We do not know where these are from. These could be from anywhere in the county, all 75,000. This is not picked out of a certain area. These are not pulled by precinct.
And so then just give us the remaining universe and when we should expect those.
Yes. So we're
Listen to
now
this.
left with about 275,000 ballots to count, and the lion's share, the overwhelming majority of these remaining votes are early ballots that were dropped off on election day.
And when do you think we'll get the results from those remaining uncounted ballots?
Good question.
We will continue in the rhythm that we've now established over the past few days. I would anticipate, again, one ballot drop or one vote update per day in the evening, probably
One vote
somewhere in
update
this
per
range
day.
that we've been somewhere around 60 to 80,000 a day, which would then make us reach completion very early next week.
Very early next.
Robert,
The chairman of the
hold on. Stop. Make it make sense, Robert. First of all, this is Bill Gates, not the Bill Gates, but the Maricopa County. What's his board of the this is the Bill Gates in Maricopa County saying that they don't know where the ballots are coming from. And at first I thought he meant at this time. I can't tell you where they're coming from. It sounds like he doesn't have an idea as to the chain of custody of these 75,000 ballots. They're Tuesday to Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, 5 days out, counting 60,000 ballots a day we're going to give up. What the hell is going on, Robert?
The logical inference, if this was any place else in the world, and you have unusual vote counting delays, those unusual vote counting delays overwhelmingly favor one side, the conclusion would be that is an unreliable, untrustworthy election result. That would be our standards imposed on the rest of the world. So there's going to be more and more Americans that have serious doubts about the integrity of American elections because of the ahistorical, highly unusual nature of how this election was conducted. And it's happened all over the place. It's happened in House races in Washington, House races in New York, House races in other places where there have been unusual, unexplained delays that magically always result in Democrats winning again and again and again and again and again and again. Again, about an 80% or so clip. So people's assumptions are going to be that that's happening because they're finding enough ballots for the Democrat to win. That's the logical inference that many people are going to. It's the one we would bring if another country did this. If Putin did this, CNN would be on nonstop about how he stole the election. So are we supposed to apply different standards to ourselves than we applied to people overseas in other countries and other nations? So it is embarrassment. Now, what can be done about it? The Justice Department could have brought civil rights actions for the fact that you had in Milwaukee people arrested, election officials for trying to falsify absentee ballots. In Arizona, a whole bunch of Republicans denied access to being able to vote because the machines magically didn't work suddenly in Republican areas. But we're seeing none of that. According to the polling that I think has now been published, so I can talk about it, Richard Barris did. The people that reported problems on election day were about like a 3-to-1 margin were Republicans. And that's because it was mostly Republicans who were voting on election day. But it also shows the systemic problem and the scale of that problem. Democrats didn't have any problem voting. Republicans did. Where is the Biden Justice Department? Well, it wanted this result, so that's why it's not intervening. So it's very hard to force them to do their job. It's hard to sue in federal court and get remedy in a meaningful way that could reverse the election outcome. So the only means to contest an election in these contests is to file what's known as an election contest. Those laws exist in Nevada. Those laws exist in Arizona. Those laws exist in Georgia. I put up an example of one that I drafted in 2020 for the Trump campaign and put it up at vivabarneslaw.locals.com so people can see it. My view is that there is a robust right to bring such an election contest in Nevada and Arizona because I don't believe the signatures will match on enough ballots that don't overcome the margin of victory, given how tiny that margin of victory is in Nevada and is likely to be if Blake Masters it doesn't overcome it in the late counted ballots, yet to be counted ballots in Arizona. I don't know whether but the issue is people have been blacklisted by the media so aggressively of being called election deniers, and there's such attack, and then there's such weaponization against them in the legal arena that it creates this fear, this censor and shame fear to silence people to not assert their legal rights and remedies. Because if a candidate doesn't bring it, other people can also bring it. But if a candidate doesn't bring it, it is extremely unlikely a court's going to pay attention. Sadly, if the courts wanted to instill confidence in America's elections, they shouldn't do what that federal judge did to the True the Vote folks and lock up people exposing problems. They should welcome an open, transparent legal process. Let's have the signature matches checked. Hire the Democrats' own signature match consultant, because it was the Democrats' own signature match expert who said enough signatures didn't match in Arizona that far exceeded the margin of victory in 2020. And then the court had to run and hide and pretend it didn't hear that and pretend it didn't matter. Signature match is the only, again, mass mail-in balloting, mass absentee balloting is unheard of in American history. It has no precedent anywhere else in the globe. It's now produced a second straight set of election results that nobody can explain. And the consequent that at least no economic model that can explain, no presidential job approval model can explain, no historical model can explain, nothing can explain beyond a bunch of ballots came in that typically would never have come in. And the question is, are they all on the up and up? And I suspect they're not. I suspect at a minimum, they don't meet signature match standards. We know in 2020, people voted in Arizona who said, no, I didn't vote. Their vote came in by mail. They said, I live in Tennessee and I voted in Tennessee. That was never meaningfully investigated by the authorities in Arizona. The person running on the Democratic ticket for governor is the Secretary of State, who runs elections. So you have a self-serving interest, and she didn't recuse herself at all. No court required it, because in Arizona, there are a lot of John McCain-style judges on the Republican side, Democrats on the other side, and consequently, they don't enforce the law in Arizona, because what they want everyone to do is to stick their head in the sand and pretend this election was on the up and up, when more millions and millions and millions of Americans believe it was anything but. Losing confidence in your power, in the power of your vote, is not the way to continue to build a constitutional democracy. But it's going to some judges are going to have to wake up to that for that to become a functional reality.
I asked you before this all went down, where even the New York Times was predicting a loss of both the House and the Senate. I said, what results would have to happen for people to say this doesn't make any sense whatsoever? And I think your answer is
exactly, yeah,
exactly
we're seeing it in live time. Yeah, I mean, as an example, in the average district where there wasn't Democratic targeting and there wasn't mass mail-in voting opportunity, Republicans outperformed. There was about a double-digit swing from 2020. Republicans outperformed their 2020 numbers by an average of 8 or more points, often by 10 points. In congressional districts and states where there's mass mail-in voting and Democratic mass targeting, we're seeing something totally opposite. We're seeing the repeat of the 2020 results. It's like, again, we have never seen this in American political history. Unheard of. There's no precedent for it. So there's no question that mail-in voting is why. The only question is that mail-in voting representing of an honest vote, just Democrats organized better? Or is it the result of fraudulent votes? Jimmy Baker said it would probably be part of fraud, that fraud would explain it if the margins were tight. Jimmy Carter said that if the margins are tight, fraud is probably the explanations. Federal judges in more than a dozen decisions over the past 50 years said absentee balloting is where all the fraud occurs. The Democratic Party in 2009 in Georgia said absentee balloting is where all the fraud occurs. Our own election standards would never allow this form of voting, vote counting, or voting anywhere else in the world and call it an election you can have confidence in. So why should we? Why should Americans? Americans shouldn't. But it'll be up to people like Adam Laxalt, people like Blake Masters, and others to bring the election contest to try to get this issue finally smoked out and vetted. This is a problem. It can't keep happening over and over again, or Americans will lose confidence that their vote has power and that our elections have integrity.
TJ MacD says, Viva, what do you expect? Fetterman and DeLuca won. That tells you the state of the elections. Here to that comment, I have no problem actually believing that Fetterman legitimately won. I can see that sort of, on the one hand, being something of a meme almost, but also on the other hand, Cernovich put out a tweet that says, he's been talking to Fetterman voters, and they view strokes like heart attacks. Like, it doesn't compromise your mental ability. It's not a handicap. And so they had no problem voting for him over Dr. Oz. I could envision easily people saying, I'm voting for Fetterman. I feel bad for him. It's an inspiring story, et cetera, et cetera. Where I have very big issues is watching what's going on in Arizona, watching what's going on in Nevada, where you have blackouts, where it takes 6 days to count the vote, and they're still not done. You have the Bill Gates saying, yeah, we're going to count 60,000 votes a day, and when we're done, we're done. It makes no sense. But Robert, what's the state?
California's still voting. They'll be counting ballots and receiving ballots for weeks and weeks and weeks. I mean, like, when Mark Robert's prediction is the most accurate, and his prediction was Democrats would openly steal it, then his predictions are the ones disproportionately coming true. Who has the better explanation for the sequence of events?
It's an interesting thing. What you say is, okay, mail-in balloting is the issue. The question is it making it easier for lazy Democrats to vote? Now they can vote in their pajamas, and democracy is truly being democratized, or is it chicanery a la 2,000 Mules and more?
And the other problem with mail-in voting is, why do we have a secret ballot in America anymore? Right? Mail-in voting is not secret. There's no guarantee it's secret. We used to have rules that said, and by the way, why did New York swing massively Republican? New York doesn't allow mass mail-in balloting. The people rejected it, interestingly enough. That's why. There's limits on who can do an absentee ballot. Historically, only a small group of people could do mail-in voting in America. And usually there were standards in place. Like, somebody had to be a witness and say, I reviewed this, and they filled it out in secret. Nobody saw it. I didn't see anybody buy it. I didn't see anybody coerce it, anybody blackmail it, etc. And then hand deliver it in such a way that there's chain of custody. Here, we have no idea whether somebody else filled out the ballot for somebody. We have no idea whether somebody blackmailed them, extorted them, coerced them, or bought their ballot.
Just pay them.
Pay them. And the difference is they can see it, right? Like, it's one thing if I pay you $50 and say, here's the ticket, go vote for these group of people. I have no idea whether you actually do it when you get in there, because it's secret. That's the whole point of the secret ballot, was to stop this kind of activity from occurring. Mass mail-in balloting erases that. You have no more safeguards anymore at all. You can go buy as many ballots as you want, blackmail as many people as you want, extort, coerce as much people as you want, and it's highly unlikely to ever become public knowledge because of where it occurs and how it occurs.
I'm going to play it one more time, because this is not just Bill Gates. This is CNN.
That are actually election day votes in person, and then the rest of the 75,000 are late earlies dropped off on election day. We do not know where these are from. These could be from anywhere in the county, all 75,000. This is not picked out of a certain area. These are not pulled by precinct.
And so then
and I suspect that the defense is going to be, we don't know where they're from offhand, or we didn't pull them out, to influence the outcome.
The problem with that is they keep magically counting the Democratic batches first, and other people can figure out where the batches are. Somehow he can't. So this guy's been harshly critical, says the Republican Party needs a whole new Republican Party, hates the Trump wing. The whole McCain establishment wing had a lot of institutional influence in Arizona, and that's why we're seeing what we saw. Like, I'm not surprised at Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Nevada, because Democrats control the election machinery up and top, left to right. I am surprised at Arizona slightly, but at the same time not, because so many of the old McCain types have institutional controls. And so we'll see if election contests are brought. I hope some are at least brought. I am worried that courts will do what they did in 2020, which was attack anybody for merely questioning the holiness of an election. The same group of people, by the way, who ran Russiagate for 4 years, telling us that we're supposed to hold elections holy. That the question is, are these folks election deniers, or are the media and the judges and the politicians fraud deniers?